He kōna ipurangi tēnei nā te reo irirangi o Aotearoa.
Kia ora koutou, no mai haere mai, and welcome to RNZ100, a century of stories. If you love history, inspiring and quirky characters, or a good old ponder about what makes us uniquely Kiwi, then this is the podcast for you. Yes, RNZ has been connecting New Zealanders and telling our stories for 100 years. So we've dug through the archive and picked out a whole heap of the best bits, the events and people that have shaped us, and the crazy, funny tales that have been forgotten until now. In fact, we've dug so deep that some of the audio you're about to hear hasn't been heard since it was first broadcast decades ago.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10.
And now for the Devil's Playground.
It was a beautiful land, a thriving community.
We'd produce a nation of gigolos.
This is jazzercise.
Crowd, music to go, chanting, rugby.
What this bill about is abnormal sex between males.
We wouldn't have known a sexual orgy, we've fallen over one.
New Zealand is brimful of interest.
I'm Mike McRoberts, and 40 years ago I started my journalism career as a cadet at RNZ. Now I'm back to celebrate 100 years of RNZ's broadcasting history. Over those 100 years, RNZ has reflected and connected New Zealanders, and this series will highlight just how wide and impactful RNZ's presence has been. This episode is Health and Wellbeing, talking about healthy habits, our guilty pleasures, and our greatest and silliest sporting achievements. Our first guest, Mary Wilson, presented Checkpoint 5 nights a week for 18 years.
Do I get a medal?
Yes, I think you should. And also, he's one of our finest investigative journalists, 30 years experience in print, TV and radio. He's produced a documentary, a written book about the alcohol industry and our relationship to booze. Guy and Espino, welcome.
Thanks, Mike. Good to be here.
Fantastic. We like to think of ourselves as a healthy, hardy nation, scalers of mountains, at home in the most remote of country huts, and immune to the elements. But it's pretty hard to enjoy the great outdoors if you're suffering from tuberculosis. So in the early 1900s, New Zealand introduced health camps for our tamariki. The camps weren't hospitals, but more of a retreat where kids who might have succumbed to the dreaded TB or malnutrition got to play outside and feel the sun on their faces, like this boy speaking to RNZ from the Roxburgh Health Camp in Otago.
Do you like being here in the camp?
Yes, it's lovely.
How long have you been here?
8 weeks, nearly.
What do you do when you're not at school?
Climbing trees and jumping down them.
What made it even more wholesome was how the camps were funded. Postage stamps with pictures of nurses and bonny-looking children on them sold for 2 pennies, one for the cost of the stamp, one to go towards the health camps. It might not sound like much, but in those days Kiwi sent enough letters to make it a thriving charity model. Campers were able to eat and drink to their heart's content.
What are you doing in here?
Come drink milk.
How often do you come in here for milk?
Every afternoon.
What else do you have?
Sometimes apples, raisins, peanuts.
You like milk?
Yes.
You'd have to like milk, wouldn't you?
Yes, that's right. Well, that recording was from 1948, and in those early post-war years, free milk was a big deal. In a world first, New Zealand introduced free milk at school, and Kiwi students slurped down half a pint every day. Now, do either of you remember milk at school?
Mm-hmm.
Oh,
unfortunately,
really?
yes, I do. Only lasted a few years, but I remember being instructed that we had to drink it. It was a privilege, and we were lucky to get it, and down the hatch it went.
Warm milk, was it?
Mm-hmm.
Oh,
horrible.
Yeah. Which part of the country did you grow up in then?
This was in Matamata, in the heart of the Waikato. So
well, of course
much
you were
milk
going to
around.
have to drink the milk.
Yeah. It was kind of your patriotic duty, I think, to drink the milk, and you couldn't possibly say that you disliked milk.
While the congealing school milk might not always have been a hit, as a nation we've always loved a little tipple of the harder stuff, even if we've taken a somewhat conservative approach to selling it. In 1961 there were only 10 restaurants in the whole country licensed to sell wine. It was pretty clear that many New Zealanders thought we couldn't be trusted with it.
What do we think of our licensing laws? You, sir, what do you think?
We are still in the dark ages as far as our licensing laws are concerned. Only persons with disgracefully low standards, no critical faculty, could think otherwise.
How about you, sir? Do you think the laws need changing?
No, they're quite all right as they are. In this way, I came to this country about 30 years ago from London, and the first thing I noticed was the closing of the pubs 6 o'clock, and I thought that was a very good idea, far better than London.
That has to be one of the classics for unintended consequences, right? I mean, that was, I think it was 1917, and then it went for 50 years to 67 until there was a referendum on it. But the idea was to get dads home from the pub at a certain hour, but it just taught us how to be experts in binge drinking, didn't it?
Yeah, we certainly didn't solve the problem. Bringing in 6 o'clock, the 6 o'clock swill, which was supposed to cut down on drinking, actually made it worse. Yeah. Or it came out of our fear of alcohol, and that you had to make sure that there were lots of restrictions around it.
Well, if you finish work at 5 and the pub closes at 6, then you're a keen drinker, then what are you going to do?
Yeah, and wasn't there a hose that just went up and down the counter with the beer, pouring it into the glasses or the jugs?
Well, then, unlike the first man in that last clip who said that only persons with disgracefully low standards and no critical faculty could think otherwise, and couldn't be trusted with alcohol, it turns out that was quite a few of us.
Yeah, I mean, as I say, just a classic of unintended consequences and terrible policy making. It's hard to believe that it lasted that long.
That's right, the 6 o'clock closing, introduced as a temporary measure for wartime in 1917. Pub goers would be booted out before the sun was down for another 50 years, and for most of that time people supported it. As these virtuous citizens told RNZ in 1958, later closing times would be a one-way ticket to the corruption of men up and down the country.
Well, I think we'd produce a nation of gigolos. It would be playing in the hands of the playboy. Those people who are depreciated in the courts and the newspapers today would be encouraged to fly by night.
And again from a Dunedin woman who feels strongly on this subject.
I'm for the 6 o'clock closing, definitely for the 6 o'clock closing, because I reckon that where danger is, where darkness is, there's danger. And I don't think it would be safe for women folk to go out after the darkness. If they were roaming around the street, these men folk that come out of the hotels at all hours of the night and under the influence of liquor, which we know makes them beasts of themselves, and they don't intend doing things in their rightful moment, they wouldn't do things.
It's like one of those zombie movies, isn't it? Except they're all gigolos and fly-by-nighters.
Making beasts of themselves, yes.
Yeah, although I guess alcohol and violence, there is a link. It's just a sort of slightly odd way of expressing it, isn't it?
Yeah. Incredible, really, that in 70 years we've gone from being a country that feared moral collapse if the pubs opened after 6 p.m. to one that is world famous for its drinking culture.
Well, I mean, we've had a problem drinking culture in many different forms for a long time, really, haven't we?
Do you think the 6 o'clock swill contributed to that?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, if there's a message about how to drink alcohol, and I mean, that's exactly how not to do it, right?
Chugging back a couple of jugs in the space of 10 minutes.
Drinking as fast as you possibly can in an environment with all men, basically. I doubt food would have been anywhere near that picture, would it?
Well, I guess the idea was to stagger home drunk, and your wife would feed you, as Guyan says, against every kind of way we should think about alcohol. It does. Yeah, and when you read those descriptions, they are actually revolting, aren't they?
And do you think we were known for our drinking culture?
I think it's interesting. I mean, you read even history of the First World War, and I remember reading one book where they were describing how all the Allied soldiers got an allocation of beer. I can't remember how many bottles, might have been a couple a day or something, and the New Zealanders saved theirs up for the week and drank them all on Friday. So
they could have binge drinking.
Yeah, so that they could get properly drunk, because it was a waste of time just drinking your 2 beers. I mean, we talk about the so-called dry drinking cultures like like that, and then the wet drinking cultures of Europe, where they tend to drink often but not very much. And I don't think we're going to hand out a Nobel Prize in anything to determine which way is going to go better for you socially, and it wasn't the New Zealand and Australian way.
Yeah, friends who'd come from Europe were just astonished at the whole attitude towards alcohol and the idea that, if you open up a bottle, you keep drinking till there's no more left, and then you can't stop.
What made our drinking culture even more dangerous was the fact that once we were finished getting boozed at the pub or a party, we'd drive home.
I read somewhere that usually the angel of death is silent, but that where thousands are killed on a battlefield, one can almost hear the rustle of his wings. We do not want to hear this on our roads and highways. What are we doing about the whole tragic business?
That was the Minister of Transport, Bob Semple, speaking in 1936, a year when 203 people were killed in road accidents. In a country of just 1.5 million people at the time, it was a staggeringly high number, and it got worse. The post-war boom saw more cars on the road that were bigger, faster and cheap to fill up. And there were no drink driving restrictions for much of the century. And by 1973, New Zealand had hit a tragic milestone, a record high road toll of 843 deaths. That's nearly 3 times higher than the average road toll these days. The drinking driving thing was massive, wasn't it? It just took such a long time for that culture to change, and such a lot of regulation.
Yeah, it did, and also it's I think one of the triumphs of public messaging. You know, often those things don't work, but I was coming of age to get my licence in the mid-80s, and we were really struck by that as kids. We were scared about it, and it worked, and so you had that big cultural shift, of that big push for public ads of don't drink and drive, and I reckon that worked. It was a cultural shift.
Yeah, I think 10 years earlier it was way different. We all got our licences in Matamata. I mean, you could get it when you were 15, and we drove to parties.
Yes,
it's a miracle that we weren't all killed, I think, sometimes when you look back at it. And often there were lots and lots of accidents. And when I was at college, it wasn't that uncommon. On a Monday morning at assembly, there'd be a moment of silence because the kids driving over the Kaimai range had killed themselves in a car crash.
Wow. And you had a Prime Minister who was driving drunk. I mean, Don McKinnon was the whip of the National Party at that time, and his job was to let down the Prime Minister's tyres if he got too drunk before he drove out to Vogel House in the hut from Parliament. So if you've got that sort of message coming from the top, then, perhaps not surprised that you had that attitude throughout the culture.
Not sure what it was like in the rural areas, though. You might be able to help me out with this one, Mary, because I do remember distinctly driving around the back blocks of Opotiki, I think, in the 90s, and there was a big road sign that said, "If you've been drinking, take it easy." I did take a photo of it at the time.
Well, yeah, I guess the attitude was that you had to get there, you drove, you did what you were there to do, and then you drove back again, and there wasn't any options. I mean, there was a little bit of carpooling. I mean, I'm talking about when I was as a teenager. I left when I was 17, 18, but it was certainly the view that no restrictions, really. You just drove, you drank, and you drove again.
Yeah, I mean, and that stat is a horrifying one, isn't it? 843 deaths in 1973, and that's a population of 3 million, remember. So that is extraordinarily high, and it's a confluence of the worst things, right? Nothing to really do in the weekends. A big country. We are a big country. We say we're a small country. We're not. We're a underpopulated country, and you've got all these poor roads, dreadful cars too, because you had still really high tariffs on any other cars, because we were Fortress New Zealand member. So we always drive Ford Anglias and bring all that stuff together, and you've got a hideous road toll. It's harrowing to think about.
Well, another big part of that equation was seatbelts, or a lack of them. And it wasn't until 1979 that front and back seatbelts were required to be fitted and worn. Despite what was at stake, the change was hard to swallow, and there was pushback. In this RNZ interview from 1991, George Taylor from the Taxi Federation claimed cabbies were somehow less at risk of an accident than the rest of the driving population.
The whole thing's a nonsense as far as taxi drivers go, because there is no real evidence that there is any danger in taxi drivers driving without seatbelts, but there's very real evidence that taxi drivers are in danger from assault by passengers, and given the current upsurge in crime, that danger may well increase.
Again, isn't it? It's funny, covering politics for a long time and looking at public policy debates. I mean, regulation and where sort of nanny state starts and individual responsibility, stops, I suppose. It's interesting to look back on the drink driving and the seatbelts as well. But gosh, I mean, how many lives would a simple piece of technology like a seatbelt have saved?
Yeah.
I know, it's so interesting that we've got this kind of science. We like to think that we've got the science bent to us as well, and being practical and evidence-based. And yet there were these pockets of resistance to something that was physics.
Yep, smoking.
Straightforward.
Smoking's the same, seatbelts. I think it's being told what to do, isn't it, in a space that you consider your own. I think that really gets under the skin of New Zealanders. I mean, possibly other people as well, but I think we're probably a bit like that.
And also being told after the fact. So, well, we've been doing this for years. We've got 4 kids in the back seat. They don't need seatbelts.
No,
they're jammed in there.
Yeah, with nearly 1,000 people dying on the roads, but hey. I remember one of my first memories was as a kid in the back of a Ford Cortina, right in the back, in a station wagon, and because I was the youngest. But there was no consideration that it was a seatbelt was an issue. I was in the back of this.
And if there was a baby, the baby would be sitting on an adult's knee.
Yes.
Probably in the front seat.
Yeah. But
and
is it PC gone mad?
Yeah.
Well, it's PS gone, personal safety.
Car seats for babies that hooked over the back seat and would actually function like a catapult.
Wow. Yeah. Scary.
In the midst of major changes to road safety, the pesky state was also interfering with New Zealanders' right to consume deadly carcinogens in the workplace. Having preached to the public about the harms of smoking for some time, the Health Department banned its workers from lighting up in the office in 1987. Employee Jerry Wren told RNZ he wasn't too pleased about the crackdown.
Yes, actually I was quite resentful because I really enjoyed smoking and didn't really want to give it up at the time. But then after a while I came to realise that the smoking was really not so much my right to have a smoke, but other people's right to have some free, clean, smoke-free air. And in addition, I couldn't smoke at home, or didn't smoke at home for my children's health and so forth, and you can't smoke on public transport. So if you can't smoke at work, you'd be a fool to carry on.
There's really no getting away from it for you at the moment. You can't smoke anywhere, it seems.
Well, no, not unless I want to get out in the middle of the night and stand outside the house or go for a walk at lunchtime. So it's much easier to give up.
Not too worried about his colleagues then?
No. Well, we're of an age, I know we all are, that we grew up in newsrooms that had cigarette and pipe smoke in them. And it was a vibe, absolutely, wasn't it? You walk into a newsroom, just this thick cloud of smoke.
Yeah. Later on, I wasn't working in a newsroom where there was actually smoking at your desk, but RNZ had instituted a smoking room, which was a disgusting little cubicle with a closed door, yellow with nicotine pretty much dripping down the walls. absolutely horrific.
At the Evening Post, when that existed, a great newspaper, and I had my first real sort of break on that paper. It was the first big sort of metropolitan daily, and you'd walk into that newsroom and there was a glass room where the news editors would be poring over proofs of the paper, and some of them be smoking cigars, you know, and you'd go in there because it was a way that people thought they could connect and get ahead at work too, wasn't it? I mean, that was the weird thing. Like the social cohesion part of it was really, really strong as well, wasn't it?
But you're right. When they stopped doing that, it forced those people who were smoking cigarettes to go outside or to go to a different part, and you kind of lost those conversations.
Yeah. Probably gained a few extra years of your life, though.
Yeah.
I remember being in Christchurch when the smoking legislation came through and all the office workers were going outside to smoke cigarettes, and I had a friend who was working with Japanese tours that come over and he'd give them a tour guide on the bus. And I remember having a chat to him one night and I said, "Oh, how's it going?" He goes, "Yeah, it's good, except all the Japanese want to know, why has Christchurch got so many prostitutes?" So all the office workers standing outside their buildings having a cigarette. Dialing back all that smoking and boozing was important not just for our health, but for our sporty national image. In the 80s, as RNZ reported, exercise got saucy thanks to the addition of pelvic thrusts and lycra.
And we pull this leg in, and we pull the other arm in, pull, and step, and pull, and step, pull, step, pull. That's it. And step and pull, and step and pull, and step and pull. Here we go.
If you think that's exhausting to listen to, try it. This is jazzercise. And here in this carpeted, enormous room are about 30 ladies and a couple of men doing a sort of gymnastic discotheque. A choreography of stretching and sweating, all for 50 minutes non-stop. Philip Mills, son of former Olympic representative Les, and no mean hurdler himself, imported this enjoyable torture.
I was at university at UCLA, and aerobic dance fitness was very big in the States. The whole fitness revolution in general was exploding in the States, and aerobic dance was quite a big part of that, and I saw that as something that New Zealand was without and that New Zealand needed.
I just keep thinking of Olivia Newton-John and Let's Get Physical.
Yep. I remember my mum with a group of her friends when I was growing up joined a jazzercise class in the mid-80s, and they were really into it. But yeah, it was lycra and leggings, wasn't it?
Jazzercise.
No, in my class it was very baggy sweats and a T-shirt and trying to keep in time with the music. The highlight, I remember Jane Fonda, a video of her talking about how it was okay to be thin, but then you had the whole problem with the muscles and the butt, and you had to do the exercises to get that all toned. So that seemed to be a message, obviously directed at women, that you couldn't just, it wasn't just about diet, you had to do other things to make sure that the body stayed in peak condition, and that involved specialist exercise, that it wasn't just walking around or going for a run. So therefore, got to go to a gym.
Well, it wasn't just specialised exercise for our bodies that became popular. It was the things we ate, and the way we ate it too. 1988 Weight Watchers representative Annie Oliden told listeners all they needed to do was avoid all delicious foods at Christmas parties and hang out with skinny people.
Try and be very careful in moving away from the food rather than to it. I think overweight people have a natural tendency that as soon as food is out to move towards it like a magnet. If we can learn to move away from it, always try and make sure you're speaking to, at that particular time, a slim person, because they don't seem to have that natural gravity to food.
Wow, some unique dieting advice there.
Move away from the food, yes.
And from the fat people.
I didn't know that overweight people had a magnet in them which drew them to the food, but that does, that's an interesting take, isn't it?
The crazy thing is, when you think about how much advice there has been for dieting over the years, different fads and
Almost all of it wrong, right?
Yeah. What was our perspective towards food in the 80s?
You know, one of the things that sticks out to me as a child of the 80s was the limited amounts of food that you could get in New Zealand. I remember discovering pesto when I went to Italy for the first time on my OE at like 25, or avocado. Or, you know, when you think, and you think about the, I don't know whether I should talk about takeaways on the Health and Wellbeing podcast, but I guess I can. It was basically just fish and chips and Chinese food, you know, so you didn't have the sort of plethora of different kinds of foods, did you? Because it was still Fortress New Zealand, really. I mean, you did need a doctor's prescription to get margarine before Rogernomics. I mean, that globalisation just hadn't kicked in, so you didn't get those foods, did you?
Yeah. I remember in the late 80s, early 90s, introducing my mother to brie. She didn't know what it was. And they used garlic, which was regarded with great suspicion.
Yes.
And European friends who were kind of astonished at the lack of variety.
My father used his local was the Black Horse in Christchurch, and
he'd have a few drinks.
He'd have a few drinks at the Black Horse, and then right next door to it was the White Horse, which was a Chinese takeaway.
Yes.
And the most exotic we ever saw was when Dad would come home with an egg foo young burger.
The chicken chow mein was very exotic, coming from Mata Mata. My first Chinese takeaway was in Wellington. I couldn't believe it.
As well as the plethora of fast food options that found their way to New Zealand in the 90s, we also adopted something else from the US: tanning. We longed for that golden California glow, and we were willing to roast ourselves to achieve it. In 1996, the Health Sponsorship Council's director Ian Potter told RNZ they were up against it.
Is that actually a serious problem for you, that Hollywood, that Baywatch, that television has all these bronze beauties, as it were, and you're trying to promote the exact opposite?
It is, because research pretty much tells us that, you know, when you're young and under the control of your parents, they'll put you in the shade generally, and they'll put sunblock on you. When you get to those dreadful teenage years and you're more conscious about how you're perceived than the sensibility of what you're doing, you start taking more notice of programs like Baywatch. And it's not the only program. There's a lot of programs on TV that show bronze beauties wandering up and down the beach, and it's difficult to compete with that sort of promotion.
So the tan versus the dreaded sunburn, and I'll give you my personal story about this, because as a young Māori kid, people thought that we couldn't get sunburnt, and so you know, we very rarely had sunblock on or anything like that, but we'd definitely get sunburnt. It was terrible.
Yeah, we got terribly burnt as kids, and my two brothers are both redheads, and they'd get burnt in about sort of 10 or 15 minutes. I'm a bit more olive-skinned, and I'd last about, you know, maybe 40 minutes or something, but I was wincing listening to that, because I can't imagine the idea of going sort of sunbathing, purposefully exposing yourself for long periods to the sun now.
But people do.
Yeah, I guess
they're still doing it.
I remember an auntie of mine rubbing butter on me because I got
work?
sunburnt.
See,
we'd
butter.
gone back to Wairoa and I got
like
terribly
basting.
Yeah. It didn't smell that great, I can tell you. But really, our outdoor and athletics pursuits have usually been about more than looking good. It's about grit, determination, and perhaps sometimes not having enough to do. Why else would anyone push someone in a wheelbarrow for 700 kilometres, as Mr. L.G. Lukey did in 1935?
September saw the finish of another derby in Wellington, this time a wheelbarrow derby. Messrs. Lukey and Scholefield concluded their arduous journey from Auckland, 468 miles, within a month. Mr. Lukey responds to his Wellington welcome.
Ladies and gentlemen, well, I think I will say that I'd rather push up Waikato Ridge than face this huge crowd. However, I want to thank you very much for the very great welcome you've given us both here today. We've had a great trip. We have thoroughly enjoyed it. We've had some bad times, bad weather and little things like that.
An accomplished road cyclist, Mr. Lukey, the wheelbarrow pusher, was in great shape when he arrived in the capital. The same couldn't be said for Mr. Schofield, the passenger, who'd smoked 50 to 60 cigarettes a day to pass the time. He'd lost 3 kilos. The pair received a hero's welcome in Wellington, complete with a marching band that led them through the city. If you can believe it, hundreds of spectators. And while marathon wheelbarrow pushing never took off as a national sport, there was a different form of expression that would become ingrained in New Zealand sporting life.
Tēnā koutou, listeners. Greetings. My Maori ancestors were a race given to expressing their feelings in song and dance. The haka, H-A-K-A, or posture dance with accompanying chant, had therefore a great appeal to them. These hakas were performed for ordinary diversions or ceremonial occasions, reception of guests, and in the form of a war dance. In this war dance, the Maoris lined themselves in sight of the enemy with their weapons of war in hand, and with terrible grimaces performed their haka to strike terror in the enemy's hearts, and so worked themselves up to a high pitch of excitement before going over the top.
That was Māori Battalion veteran and son of Sir Apirana Ngāta Henare Ngāta explaining the haka to RNZ listeners in 1938. And although it had been performed before overseas matches for 50 years by then, it would take another several decades for it to be taken seriously. Embarrassingly, prior to 1985, the haka had very little input from Māori players. It often looked like a cross between the Macarena and a half-hearted Irish jig. When Wayne Buck Shelford joined the national team, he and fellow All Black Hika Reid decided enough was enough, took matters into their own hands, creating the powerful haka we see today.
Why do you think they did it so badly? I mean, I know why they did it badly, but why did they think
do it at all?
They need it. Do it at all.
Yeah,
yes, yes.
Well, that's a good point. I didn't know, and just until we were doing this, that the Māori players didn't really have much to do with it, but that seems just crazy.
But I do have memories of that sort of, very lame, I don't know, I suppose it's just like, guys who don't really want to dance, and they're sort of sitting on the side of and they get forced to do it. So it was very sort of half-hearted, wasn't it? And fairly cringe-making compared to what is genuinely a spine-tingling, amazing performance that you see nowadays.
It certainly has mana these days. I actually have spoken to Buck Shelford about this, and he was at a school in Napier, and one of the kids there said to him, "Why is your haka so terrible?" And he said, I couldn't give him an answer, so I thought, right, we're going to change this, and they did.
Yeah, good on them.
And you think about the performance of that haka, and that we see that Māori expression and see it in its true form.
Yes, but it's still controversial, isn't it? And I find it fascinating because, it still can be a lightning rod for where we're at as a country, can't it? Because you'll see haka used for political reasons by some sporting teams at some points. Do you remember that?
And there's been controversy over that.
Yeah.
Yes,
exactly.
the particular words used,
that's
if
right.
they referred to political policy.
Because it is such a vibrant and unique expression in Te Ao Māori, it's still, can be used and can be a source of real debate and controversy.
Yeah, and I think we see it's not only a challenge as well these days. Sporting teams will often do it at the end of a game to thank supporters, or maybe it's the supporters doing it to the team.
Or at an award ceremony, someone's won an amazing award and suddenly a haka erupts. So, yeah, it bleeds into all elements of New Zealand life now.
Well, a lot has changed in the last 100 years. For much of the 20th century, our success in the sporting arena was about bringing glory to a monarchy on the other side of the globe. In 1950, we hosted our first Commonwealth Games, then known as the British Empire Games, and the royalist fervour was very real.
But the spirit of the Games, which is the spirit of our empire, lives on. They came from the ends of the earth, these happy, healthful, colourful bands of athletes, to be our guests for a moment only. Yet the best remains. Friendship, mutual respect, a deepened loyalty to one king, and to the high principles of living for which the king stands.
Yeah, so that was a news report. Sounded like a bit of theatre, but so invested in England and Britain, wasn't it?
Oh, yeah. And I mean, you go back and read the speeches when New Zealand joined the Second World War, and they literally said, where Britain goes, we go. You know, totally unqualified. Doesn't matter, you know, we will go where you go. So that's how close that tie was. And we were Britain's farm too. We're completely reliant on them economically. I think we, sent 70 or 80% of our exports went there.
And people's reference sometimes to it as home.
Yes.
Yeah, the mother country, right?
Yeah.
Me and Mike grew up in Christchurch, so we can tell you a thing about that.
Well, even when Sir Edmund Hillary and Tenzing Norgay completed their heroic ascent of the world's highest peak 3 years later, it was framed as a gift for newly crowned Queen Elizabeth II by then acting Prime Minister Keith Holyoake.
If the news is correct, and I'm assured absolutely that it is, then our New Zealander Hillary has climbed to the top of the world. He has put the British race and New Zealand on the top of the world. And what a magnificent coronation present for the Queen. How proud we all are that this is from our loyal little New Zealand.
Hillary and Norgay were catapulted into a media frenzy, and the baffled Kiwi climber was knighted by the new monarch as soon as he arrived in London.
I would like to say how much all the members of the expedition did appreciate the good wishes from people, from everyone that we received before the expedition. I know John Hunt in particular was very conscious of more or less the importance, not only from the aspect of climbing the mountain, but also the importance of getting to the top if we could, because so many people wanted us to. I don't think George and I were particularly motivated by this factor. We're pretty keen on getting to the top anyway.
I just want to take a moment and say, Sir Ed, what an absolute legend. And, that comment about you knocked the bastard off. I mean, it's just so Kiwi, isn't it?
I was lucky enough to go to Antarctica with Ed Hillary, and me and the TVNZ cameraman jumped off first when we got there to get this shot of him walking off the plane, and his big craggy eyebrows and stuff, and he's a huge mountain of a man, and he just lit up when he saw the snow. He was on fire for like 5 days, and it's such a beautiful, humble, incredible giant of a man. But New Zealand and New Zealanders really saw a lot of themselves in him. He was I think we thought he was the best of us, eh? And comments like that, the self-deprecating stuff,
He's so down to earth.
Yeah, and just so utterly unpompous, if I can invent a word.
Well, it was a legendary achievement, one of the greatest sporting moments in history, but Hillary played it down, perhaps setting the tone for the many Kiwi athletes who would battle through the most painful, trying of circumstances and shrug it off like it was no big deal.
Your arms are moving and you're swimming along, but your mind's somewhere else completely, You just don't really think of anything. I think it's a form of a trance, really. If you don't believe you can do it, that's it. If you can get your mind on a level where it just doesn't think of any pain that you're having, right, you might feel like my stomach cramps. I felt them, but I thought, oh yeah, well that's it. Just don't think about it. Think of anything else but yourself.
That was 15-year-old Meda McKenzie in 1978, the year she took on the English Channel and won. As documented by RNZ Spectrum program, she swam from England to France in just over 13 hours, battling thunderstorms and strong currents, swarms of jellyfish and debris in the 33-kilometre open water stretch. G'd along by her coach, Clive Lewis, Mackenzie was motivated in her swims not by accolades and recognition, but by sheer stubbornness, and in part a desire for Lewis to give up the ciggies. Lewis recorded a minute-by-minute commentary for listeners back home.
I've had 2 cigarettes. Each time I light up, Meda looks over and smiles because she knows that I'm going to be giving up if she makes it across the channel. The last cigarette I had, she splashed a little bit of water over me, trying to put it out. She says there's no point in smoking because I'm not going to be smoking in another 6 hours anyway.
He's media gold, isn't he?
Incredible.
Yeah, and the insight into how much sport can be a mental exercise, right?
Geez, we breed them tough, don't we?
Yeah.
Not you or I, though, Guy, just, generally speaking.
That's right.
Yeah. Well, grinning and bearing it is a theme for our sporting greats, and few people encapsulated old-school Kiwi stoicism like Colin Meads the day he broke his arm 6 minutes into a game and finished the match anyway. He told RNZ what happened in the match against Eastern Transvaal in 1970.
As far as I can recollect, I had all my weight on the arm. I sort of fell over in a ruck sort of thing, and had all the weight on my left arm, and I got a kick in the back of it there, and it was just through the weight being on it and the kick at the same time that something had to go, I suppose, put it that way, and that's what happened, more or less. And it's one of those things could happen any game, I think, and it happened.
Feel a little conflicted by that, but
yeah, come on, it's ridiculous, right?
Yeah, it's ridiculous.
Yeah, I mean,
you've broken your arm. Stop playing.
Yeah.
He's a New Zealand hero, though, isn't he, for doing it?
Of course.
Yeah, he is. But that is the same kind of attitude that has seen a lot of people damaged with concussions and things too, isn't it? But yeah, it was a culture really for as far as men went, where you were judged by how much you could drink, how much pain you could endure, and how much pain you could inflict on others. I mean, they were big parts of it. And look, yeah, I might get pinged for being too sort of censorious there, but that was a big part of the culture. And
you're in a safe environment, Guy. You're good. Unlike Buck Shelford's scrotum, or maybe Richie McCaw's broken rib, both done in games as well. And, these guys, I mean, they're just crazy things to have endured.
Now, I remember my grandfather completely dismissive of soccer.
Yeah.
Rugby was what you played if you were a bloke.
It's been interesting too, hasn't it, as we've opened up our sporting interests as a country.
I mean, one of the massive changes, and I'm sure Mary would agree with me on this, has been just, proper reporting of women's sport. For most of our lifetimes, it just wasn't celebrated and taken seriously at all, was it?
Yeah, huge change, I think. A lot more interest in other sports. I've grilled my son, who's in his late 20s, about who he knows, who's interested in rugby, watches rugby, goes to rugby games. He can't come up with anyone.
Is that right? That's interesting. I'm fascinated that when the All Blacks lose now, I mean, the morning lasts for about 30 seconds. Whereas it was not, I mean, I've covered politics a long time. They used to make sure the All Blacks games were nowhere near an election, because if you lost, it was considered,
Oh my goodness, yes, the World Cup losses, honestly.
Yeah.
Trauma.
I've been to war zones, but it's seen nothing as violent as the aftermath of a All Blacks semi-final loss in the World Cup. There we have it, 100 years of RNZ health and wellbeing. Any final thoughts?
I love the clips. It's so cool hearing those voices of people from the time. The kid at the health camp. It's just great. It's kind of magical the way you can get back into a time. Hear somebody talking like that. It really brings it alive in quite an amazing way.
Yeah, you can tell so much about change from the way people speak. It does sound different, but you can still connect to the Kiwi spirit. They are almost voices from another country, given the history, but I think that strand and still of what it means to be a Kiwi is still with us.
Ladies and gentlemen, well, I think I will say that I'd rather push up Psychocker Ridge than face this huge crowd. However, I want to thank you very much for the very great welcome you've given us both here today.
Well, after talking about all these Kiwi sporting legends, now might seem an odd time to be going back to Mr. Lukey and Mr. Schofield, the guys who trundled from Auckland to Wellington in the wheelbarrow in 1935. But actually their efforts kind of epitomise what makes sport in this country great. The whole impetus behind their epic trip was hearing about a similar wheelbarrow journey in Australia that took 10 weeks. Mr. Lukey said that was too long. Mr. Schofield said he couldn't have done it any faster. And the whole thing happened as a way of A, beating the Aussies, and B, winning a silly bet between mates and taking the North Island scenery in at the same time. From experimenting with jazzercise to conquering the open seas and the world's highest peaks, we've simply had a crack to see what would happen and stuck at it with an admirably pig-headed level of commitment. Yes, we've smoked and we've drunk and we've eaten a little too much along the way. The government sorted most of that out, or at least tried to, leaving us to get on with the important business of getting out there and giving things a bloody good go. Tēnā kōrua, Guyan and Mary, thanks very much for taking the time to be with us.
Thanks, Mike. Thanks, Mary. It was great to be there. Really enjoyed it.
Real pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to RNZ100, a century of stories. If you'd like to see more, then visit our accompanying website for extra stories, pictures, and a whole lot more audio archive that didn't feature in this episode. Check it out at rnz.co.nz/RNZ100. That's 100. And don't forget to follow RNZ100, a century of stories, so you can listen to more episodes. Available wherever you get your favourite podcasts.